Start the webinar. So allow us another minute to see if more participants are joining us, and then we shall begin. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on this National Technology Day. Today, as we explore the theme from schools to startups, we delve into how technology is not just reshaping education, but also paving the way for the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs. At EI, we strongly believe in leveraging deep pedagogical research, large-scale student data, and cutting-edge technology to transform traditional educational models. This approach equips students with the capabilities to navigate the future confidently, preparing them for careers that do not exist yet, and fostering a culture of innovation and creativity. In today's discussion, we will explore this dynamic intersections of technology and education that can actually create leaders of tomorrow in the classrooms of today. I'll take a moment to introduce myself. I am Mansi Kasliwal. I am working for the growth and partnerships vertical with EI's Shiksha team that focuses on the public school ecosystem. I've spent about 12 years working at an intersection of education, skilling, and social impact. I've studied to be an architect and have a master's degree in sustainability. I'm also a parent, and hence I have a special interest in listening to today's panelists. Let me introduce our first panelist, Aarthi Murlidharan. Aarthi is a senior VP at EI, who is at the helm of EI's flagship diagnostic and benchmarking assessment solution called EI Asset. She's deeply passionate about making quality education accessible to children from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. And with a strong belief in the transformative power of technology in education, she shifted her focus from developing enterprise server management solution at Dell's R&D Center to enhancing student learning outcomes. Aarthi holds an MSc degree in information systems from BITS Pilani. So welcome, Aarthi. Very happy to have you on the panel.
Thank you, Mansi.
Our next panelist is Varath. Varath is a VP of Product and Head of Cares. Varath brings with him a wealth of experience in innovating educational content and solutions. Before his tenure at EI, he has spent 7 years at Equitas Microfinance, where he launched several nonprofit products and social initiatives for education, healthcare, and retail. Varath has also embarked on a venture to enhance English fluency among young working professionals and was able to grow the platform with over 5 lakh users. Varath also has an engineering degree, actually an electrical engineering degree. Welcome, Varath, to the panel. And our last panelist is Ashwini, who is an educator and content creator. Ashwini has actually made 1,200 videos for young kids between the ages of 10 to 16, popularizing science. She was admitted to Columbia's Teachers College in 2022, has worked on NEP under the drafting committee, and is currently developing a computational thinking curriculum and content at EI. And you know what's really interesting about the panelists here today is that everybody comes from different backgrounds, right? From engineering, not from teaching at all. But it's what really brings everyone together on this panel is their passion for teaching and for finding ways to improve and enhance learning outcomes of children. So we will begin the panel shortly. We have 3 different segments in the panel. But what I would request all our audience to do is there is a Q&A box wherever you have questions for any of our panelists. Please feel free to type your question in the box, and we will take the questions, time permitting. So our first segment is on fostering problem-solving skills. Aarthi, I'm going to direct this question at you. What do you think, Aarthi? Increasingly we are noticing the need to equip students with 21st century skills. But what is the foundation to building these skills, and why do students need these skills today?
Right. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Mansi. And I think this is such a relevant topic. So as we begin to answer this question of why is it so relevant today, I think we can take a moment to understand what are 21st century skills, right? These are skills and competencies that are required for solving problems or being successful in the modern world. And essentially, while there are multiple skills, we can broadly categorize them into critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, innovation, communication, collaboration, literacy for digital literacy, environmental literacy, and even emotional intelligence, right? These skills are traditionally beyond the academic content knowledge that we teach in schools. And why have these skills recently raised in all our discussions and gained a lot of significance? I think one way to summarize this would be this quote that I read from a high school teacher, which actually means a lot, right? Where he says that we're currently preparing our students for jobs and technologies that don't exist yet, and in order to solve problems that we don't know yet are problems, right? This just means that it's not just enough for us to teach what the textbook says or what the curriculum says, but we'll have to go beyond to help children know how to learn so that they are continuously in this path of learning as the world around us is rapidly evolving. Who knew about ChatGPT a few years ago, right? And today all of us are using it. So I think that is why it becomes very essential for us as educators and for us as a community to think about 21st century skills. Now, how can we look at foundations to enable these 21st century skills? Well, some of this could be both in terms of when we are helping our children learn the content of the curriculum, how can we help them look at it at a much higher level? Which means, of course, the proficiency in content is needed, but can we weave it into interdisciplinary themes? Can they learn about what they're learning in a social studies subject, along with global awareness about intercultural relationships, about environmental and financial literacy? Right? So, how can high quality questions like these go into our assessments that will help check for deep understanding from a student's point of view? How can we prepare our pedagogical practices in line with some of these? So it would mean, how can we build capacity in our teaching system to facilitate some of the development of these skills in our educator community? And thirdly, how can we give them exposure to a lot of real life situations, which could be by partnering with communities, partnering with agencies that are working on real life problem solving, right? So all of this will help our children get to dabble into a space which is traditionally not very interdisciplinary, but able for them to, kind of look at a same problem in the context of how a mathematics concept is being applied, and at the same time, how they're able to use their English language skills to communicate about it and collaborate with the team to solve the problem. So I think that's how, Manasi, we can look at, how do we move ahead in this space.
Thanks, Aarthi. I think some very pertinent points made in terms of, how asking the right question is actually the starting point of, how students can transform how they're learning. And there's so much unknown out there. Like we as educators sitting today here know very little about what the students are going to be facing. So I think the what we can do right now is equip them with enough foundational information that can actually, empower them to deal with those situations later. But Varath, here's a question for you. How do you think teachers can encourage students to apply these problem solving skills to subjects other than mathematics and science? Because I think science and mathematics are well understood in that sense. But what about other subjects, and what can teachers do about that?
Yeah, I think this distinction that you do about how can we encourage problem solving skills in subjects other than math and science is a particularly crucial point. And Aarthi just mentioned about how the teachers quote about how students who we are teaching today are going to be out there solving problems that we don't even know exist. So if kids are going to be solving problems like that, how can we prepare them better today in the classroom without handling this slightly unknown domain of encouraging problem solving skills? And just to be clear, even not just in the future, even today, doctors, lawyers, teachers, whichever profession you take, we are all solving problems in our day-to-day lives. And there is that amount of critical thinking, understanding of how you gather data, how you distill it into the right insights and apply that knowledge to do the right thing. That's pretty much the problem solving skills that we're looking to impart in students, right? And if we want kids to be able to apply this in whatever domain they're going to get in, the sooner we get them started in this line, the better. And hence the nudge that let's pick this up in every subject that we are able to teach. So if in social science, if we are going to teach about a particular topic, how can we pick a problem that will be relevant to both the concept being taught and to the child as well? And researchers have shown this repeatedly that if a kid understands the relevance of the topic being taught, if they personally find value in learning that topic, they are going to be that much more motivated to learn. So it's not just from the angle of encouraging problem solving in that domain, but also for the kids to become more motivated to learn that topic itself, that it becomes crucial that we don't limit ourselves to math and science. And we can look at each of these subjects, in, be it languages, be it social science, any of these subjects, there are enough and more examples of problems that are out there to be solved. Our challenge is going to be to try and see how we pick the right ones that are both relevant to the kids, relevant to the topic, and can be handled in a way that we are able to finish our syllabus and still get around to these other topics as well.
Right. Thank you, Varat. And I think, again, if I have to sort of summarize my takeaway from that, is that all subjects are fairly interdisciplinary in that sense. And I think the nature of problems that students are currently or will need to solve in the near future are all, not going to be sort of subject based or put under those heads in those buckets. So as teachers, as educators, the more correlations we can find between each of these subjects and give them more real life problems, the better a chance the kids will have to facing some of these challenges as they grow into an unknown realm of not knowing what professions will exist in the future. So thank you, Varat, for that. Ashwini, here's a question for you. Can you provide any examples of everyday activities that parents can engage with at home? So, Varat's given some examples on what teachers can do. What about at home? Like, what can parents do in helping young children solve, get some of these problem-solving skills started at a very young age?
Yeah, thanks, Mansi. I think, first of all, so heartening to see so many people attend this on a Saturday evening. So those of you who are actually parents, one of the concerns I want to address before answering this is one might think, I haven't learned any of this during my time. I wasn't taught this. So I have to learn something new and then teach it to my kids. So I have to put in that homework of, unlearning and relearning a whole lot of things. Well, not really. So when I mentioned all the things that you could do, you'll very easily see that it's not about learning something new, but finding where these elements of problem solving and critical thinking already exist in the everyday tasks that you do. And also the list of items that I'll mention are all off device. So, another bonus point there on, it doesn't need critical thinking, problem solving is not something that happens only in a digital world. It's been happening. The only difference is we're using it to solve problems in the digital world. So one of the things parents could very easily do is even something as simple as cooking together with their children. When you teach them that there is a certain algorithm that you follow, there is a recipe is an algorithm. In fact, even in class, when we give an example of what an algorithm is, usually we're talking about a recipe. We give a recipe as an example saying to measure out in the ingredients, there is a certain ratio, there's a certain proportion in which you'd mix them. A set sequence is there. And also the best meal makers out there know that the best meal is that which parallelizes a whole lot of tasks. So you're trying to make that entire process super efficient, saying, okay, while I have the noodles boiling in salt and oil, I also want to get started on the sauce because, it's going to save me time, etc. So, there's like stuff happening parallelly. So this is exactly how a CPU also processes things, right? It gives you the illusion of speed because it's just doing all these things together. So that is a very good way to engage them and to get them to think about these problems, saying, how do I optimize this recipe? Another very simple thing you could do is just play board games with them. This used to be a more common thing during my time, but I understood that a whole lot of strategizing in my younger days came through playing board games, through playing something as simple as, say, Snake and Ladders or Ludo. These days, you have so many options. I may not even know the names of all of them. A whole lot of you who have young kids might know them better than me. There's something called Pandemic, which is about how disease spreads, and you have different characters who stop the disease from spreading. There's a scientist who's trying to find a cure to it. So it's just a regular board game. But there's so much strategizing involved, saying, how do I deploy these different characters to stop the disease spread? And you're playing against the board game. So it's trying to spread the disease, and all of you, the players, are coming together to stop that. So another is Cluedo, which is like a murder mystery sort of thing. Again, a strategy game, a lot of logic thinking involved, right? And such fun. It doesn't have to be, we think of problem solving and critical thinking as, oh, this, really effort taking. It's not a homework. It's something that humans are kind of built to do. It's very natural to us. It doesn't have to be unfun. The other thing you could do if your child is a little tuned to science and a little curious along those lines is do simple science experiments. And you don't even have to wait for the school to start doing this. You can do it with fairly young kids. I would recommend grade 1 and above. We used to do this thing with our kids where you write a secret message with lemon juice and we hold it over a flame, like not burn it, but like just hold it warm, that lemon juice, so that that writing turns brown. There's like a secret message passing thing. And the very common one that you had seen where you have milk and you add pepper or food color to it, and then you take a Q-tip, you touch it to soap, and then you see that food color, you know, create this really nice art in the milk. So there is a science to that too. And there's the baking soda vinegar volcano, baking soda and vinegar rocket, fitting an egg through a bottle without actually touching it. So all these, they utilize concepts from pressure, etc. And also that anti-gravity experiment that they do where you hold a card on top of a glass of water and then you invert it. So all of these are fun experiments that you could do with element of curiosities and element of science in it. And it actually gets them thinking, why is this happening? Because it's counterintuitive. Another thing, if not just if you're from a financial background, but if you're somebody who's good with budgeting and saving, etc., you can actually get them to do the same. And that can be started at, grade ages 7 and above. And it teaches them practical math. And if you see some interest where they are trying to understand how does this process work, how does, say, for example, our family budget our needs, and then go on to, oh, how does a company do this, or a city, or even a government do this? So an interest in finance and economics that way could be sparked. And for kids who love to build stuff, you could get mechano sets, Lego blocks, etc. Because one of the things that we very strongly believe at EI is that when we talk about preparing kids for a 21st century digital world, we don't just want them to be consumers of digital information or digital technology. We want them to be creators of it. So it's very necessary to work that muscle, saying, we're not just somebody who consumes technology, you are those who are going to build it and modify it going forward. And even involving them in basic repair work around the house, fixing a tap, fixing a loose chair leg, table leg, mending tears and cracks, etc. So and you could also discuss current events with them, where you encourage them to form an opinion, and of course, don't judge it. It's okay to challenge their views, but then, try and go back and forth, try and understand where they come from, try and give them, a better perspective of looking at it. And I think the bottom line is, don't discourage any sort of questioning. It's okay to say, oh, this is not the right time, but don't ask questions. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, I think some of those examples that you gave sort of took me back to my childhood, because I think, like, especially baking, right? It is a perfect example of mathematics and chemistry coming together, and not just the hard skills of, ratio, proportions, and it's also the soft skills of just patiently waiting for that cake to finally rise. So I think there's a lot of patience also that comes, and these soft skills are, I think, equally important when you're looking at equipping our children with the next century skills, because community engagement, patience, just understanding people around us is also very, very important. Another thing that you brought up was also very interesting, where you mentioned games, right? And even with some of my own experience of trying to solve really large scale community problems, right? And not just with children, but even with adults, we've always found board games bringing the community together. So when you actually simulate a real life situation, and that simulation could be coming from how does everybody share water, so just shared resources, what is the best way to share resources in an optimized manner, how do people take roles and responsibilities. I think once those community problems are brought down to a board game level, such that everybody can see that from sort of a top level, without any biases coming in, most of those problems at the community level have also just got solved by just putting it on a board game. So those are brilliant examples, Ashwini. Thank you for them. And a lot of those examples also reminded me of these magic shows that kids go to, eggs slipping into small bottles, so I think chemistry, magic also go hand in hand. We shall move on to our next segment. And Aarthi, this is a segment where I'd actually like to ask you a couple of questions. And again, coming from my very personal experience, when I was filling out school admission forms for my daughter, one of the schools actually had a question which said, "Do you think that your child is gifted?" And my daughter was like going to pre-primary school at that time, and I said, I don't know, how do I know? Of course I think my child is gifted. Every parent thinks their child is gifted. So I think the question is, like, what are those early signs that teachers and parents should look for to spot talent in their children, and therefore then what can be done with that talent? But in your experience, what have you found to be some of those early indicators of potential, of talent among young children?
Yeah, I think as parents or even as people who love children, right? Like we all like to want to have those children have some special abilities. And we are constantly on the lookout for something or the other, right? So, I mean, we all firmly believe that every child is talented. It's just the ability to spot that talent in the rest of us who are trying to spot that is where there is a focus and energy that is required, right? Now, because children are talented in different ways and children behave differently, well, there are some common signs that we could look around at, right? One, for example, is the child showing a keen interest on something? Is the child passionate about something? Now, of course, the word passion can be blown up and used in multiple different ways, but is the child like interested and is willing to spend a lot of their time on an activity or in a particular area or a hobby of theirs, right? That's one lead indicator for us to say that, oh, maybe my child is interested in this, maybe my child wants to know more about this. And that's one a space where we as educators, as parents, can then look at nurturing the child in that particular area. Right. The second thing, as a sign that one can look at, is when a child is engaged in such an activity, there is a high level of engagement from the child, which basically means that the child is quite focused when he or she is doing that activity and is taking a lot of time and is intrinsically motivated. It's not like the parent saying that once you do this, I'll give you TV time, or I'll take you to an ice cream parlor, or whatever, right? But the child has a lot of intrinsic motivation that is driving them to do this. And we have, each one of us, even as adults, have experienced this, that there are one or two things that nobody tells us that we need to do, but we are doing it by ourselves, right? These are our areas of interest. The third area that one can look at is, are they showing signs where they're synthesizing information from different sources about this particular area that they are interested in and applying this in ways that are quite novel, right? So they are able to bring in 2, 3 different pieces of information and then put it together and bring it in a creative way. For example, your child might have read a murder mystery story or a story from a comic, anything, right? Now, when the child is then able to use some elements from there when they are asked to write a story, right? That's a place where you can see that they are synthesizing information from different places, or they would have read a news article, or they would have experienced something in their real life, but they're able to bring that in, right? Another way to look at is, most of the times children are quite self-aware in those areas that they are quite interested and talented in. They know what they're good at. They also exhibit a high degree of resiliency, which means that they're willing to keep trying and trying and trying until they get it right. Like we see a child, who is trying to get that Lego block stand straight, right? Or also have a lot of patience while they engage in that particular activity. And they show a lot of curiosity and inquisitiveness to learn more about it. These are some signs for us to, be on the lookout for and encourage children to be able to go deeper in these areas. I think as parents, as educators, one of the things that would really help us spot some of these is being patient with ourselves in terms of our journey to going about spotting these things is not easy. But yeah, this is one of the key aspects of spotting talent.
Yeah, I think patience among parents is something that should also be taught in schools, Bharat. So, but
Parenting is never taught.
yeah, I know. I mean, that's the thing, right? We can, but yes, it's very, very important virtue of being a parent, because I think a lot of the onus of actually spotting this talent lies on the parent. And once it's spotted, Aarti, what next, right? What are those specific steps that should be taken to actually provide the right environment for then these gifted children to flourish in those areas that have been identified?
Right. I think spotting is one key aspect, right? Like let's say that one has spotted, or one is probably at a space where they're not very sure that they've spotted it, but they still want to pursue it. I think it's still worth pursuing it at that stage, right? So what can we all do when we are in such a space, right? Is to see how we can create thoughtful experiences for our children where we could craft something for them. For example, we can provide them exposure to enriching activities in the space of the child's interest. For example, if your child wants to explore a lot about cooking, why not use that to kind of help the child see what more can the child do around that space, right? There are multiple levels of baking. We took baking as an example earlier in this conversation, right? There are multiple levels. So like slowly but steadily helping the child get exposed to different enriching activities around their area of interest is one thing that we can do. And encourage our children to experiment with what they're learning, right? Like, so there is a lot of hands-on, and also experiment with what they're learning, in the sense of it's okay to fail sometimes, and but not get judged. Right. So hold on to our judgment of what they're doing. Most of the times we say, oh, no, 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 don't pour it like that, like pour it like this, it's going to drop down. No, like even small things like that, I think, where we hold ourselves off and help the child get into an environment where they feel comfortable, where they feel like there is space to experiment. It's all right to fail. It's all right to try new ideas, and not all new ideas are going to, kind of work. So for them to learn this, because that's extremely essential for children, irrespective of what area of interest that they want to develop in. Thirdly, is to have some kind of a expert or a mentor who can guide them in that particular area to hone their skills, right? Like if you possibly take another common example of my child is good at music. The natural thing that most of us as parents or educators would do is to give the child a space where he or she can work with someone who's an expert in that field, who's a musician, right? So how can we help them get engaged with a mentor of sorts who's an expert in that area, who can provide those enriching activities for our children, right? And fourthly, looking at how we can give them exposure to groups of people. These could be groups of other children who have similar interests, who have high abilities in those areas, or even exposure to groups in the community who are solving problems around this, who can kind of give the child an experience of a real world situation, problem solving on that particular area of interest, right? All of these are ways in which we can increase the exposure of the child. And of course, when thought about it, one would also say that because at some point in time, it will become an individualized approach of exposure for that particular child that suits this child the most. And finally, because most of these children are quite self-aware, I think it's important for us to help them engage in activities that help them reflect what went well, what have I learned, what can I do better, what can I do next, right? To be able to reflect and see what the next step in terms of moving in this journey could be. I think these are some ways in which we could look at nurturing the potential of children.
Right. Perfect. I think that's a lot of important information. And for the benefit of all the parents out there, I'm just going to quickly summarize everything that Aarthi said. So in terms of, I think spotting is key when you think you have a gifted child, and we all think we have children who have, a certain talent, and all children do have certain talents. I think the important thing is spotting, and the sort of the stepwise approach to doing that would be to see how much time a child is spending on those activities with high engagement, with intrinsic motivation, without the promise of any bribes, any external factors that would motivate them to take up that activity, how they are synthesizing and applying that particular skill or talent to other areas of life. And in terms of the next steps that can be taken once one or two of such special skills or talents have been identified, is number one, helping the, creating a safe environment for the child to actually, which is free of judgment, for the child to explore more, and ensuring that there is a space for failure as well. Also enabling an environment where there are mentors, peers, such that the child can further hone their capabilities, and then provide them a space for further engagement and reflection, so that they can actually keep on consistently improving on that. So here are some of the sort of spotting indicators, and some of the ways in which you can nurture skills amongst your children, so that they can develop something that they are showing an initial interest in. Thank you so much for that, Aarthi. Varath, we are going to move on to the next segment, where the question is for you, is to, how do you think structured approaches to skill integration might work? So can you please discuss with us how schools can structure their curriculum to include both rigorous academics and some of these essential skills that we've discussed, without overwhelming both the students and teachers, right? It seems like a lot. We want the child to do everything from interdisciplinary skills to extracurriculars to academics, but how can schools do that where academic rigor is maintained and a lot of these other essential skills, both on the tech side and on the soft skills, can be developed?
Yeah, I mean, I found myself taking notes when Aarthi was talking about what we can do as parents. So I think there is a lot that we want to do for our kids, right? Both as parents and as educators. And Ashwini also had so many good specific ideas in terms of the kind of activities that we can engage kids with. But the question always is, it's probably easier for a parent to do this at home rather than teachers in a classroom, given that we have so many other things to cover in the classroom. We have 30, 40 students in a classroom. There is not as much time for individual attention as a parent might have. But I think that's where the opportunity lies for the school to create an environment where all stakeholders can be brought together to see how best we can work together on achieving this. And one common pushback, I think, one very realistic struggle that school leaders as well as educators have on this front is the pressure to finish syllabus, right? So as much as we want to do all of these other nice things, the first thing that we need to be sure of is, have we finished the syllabus? There is a test schedule 2 weeks from now. How do I ensure that I've finished whatever topics I've committed to finish by then? And pressure is real, but I think if all stakeholders come together, we put our heads together, these are problems that can be solved. And a few ways that I think we can, a school can look at doing this is, one, how much can we shift from what we call rote learning to actually learning the right essential concepts. One of the things that we work with both at our learning products as well as our assessment products at AI is, any concept that is being taught or being assessed on, have we distilled that chapter, the concept, to its most key essential ideas, and has the child understood it? We test for that in our assessments, and we hope to help the kids learn for that through our learning products. And that's pretty much what we would encourage teachers also to find. So in effect, what I'm kind of provocatively saying is, can we find those one or two small non-essential concepts in a chapter that we either skip altogether or deal with differently by asking the kids to come back and share notes on that topic, etc. The other thing we can do is, as school leaders, provide teachers some amount of space to experiment with different teaching learning practices. The more we're able to liberate ourselves, both teachers and students, if we can liberate ourselves from the textbook and not get tied down by, okay, I've gone up to page 40, but I need to go up to 50 before a certain timeline. If we can get ourselves rooted to what we're trying to get the children to learn, and how can we achieve that, not just by covering these ABC topics, but also by bringing in a mix of both group and individual activities. And I think, Mansi, you brought this up earlier as well, in terms of how we can enable cross-subject integration, right? Again, a different form of liberating yourself from the textbook by saying that if you know that the science teacher is teaching a particular topic, how can you weave in a passage in English that probably talks about something relevant to that? So the kid is learning something from on the English side, but is actually also assimilating something that they've already learned in their science class or are learning. So those kind of integrations really go a big way. I think a lot of this, we start off with how parents have a better, more bandwidth to be able to do some of these things, right? So the more we're able to loop in parents into the students' work, the better. So if this school can create an environment where some of these activities at least are presented back to parents as a group, that is something that the child is going to have a lot of pride in presenting their work to parents. And obviously, the parents also get a lot of joy and satisfaction in seeing their kids present something to the entire classroom and the other parents. And one of the other things that I would sort of like to challenge, when I was a kid in the class, we spent a lot of time where the teacher would kind of dictate notes and we just write them down. So we have to prepare for the exams. Going with this paradigm of focusing on essential ideas, liberate ourselves from the textbook. If we want kids to learn problem solving and be able to answer larger problems, like we said, problems that we don't even know exist, if they're going to solve those, can we start with giving them that space and freedom and independence to say that as long as you understand the concept, we'll give you the space to write in your own words the understanding you have on a certain topic. So if we can release ourselves from the time that we take in terms of dictating notes, and then use that time more productively in some of these other activities that we all just mentioned, I think that would be a great way in which schools can enable some of this to happen. I would say the largest contribution that a school leader can bring into the table is how can we bring all the stakeholders, be it teachers, parents, students, how can we get all of them on board to this message that yes, if we need to prepare you for the future in class 9 and 10, it's extremely essential that we prepare you for the board exams. But in earlier years, can we focus a little more broadly, a little more widely to ensure that you're not just prepared for the board exams that are going to happen some years from now, but also for the rest of life that's going to come after that?
Right. Well, that's a lot of information, and I'm still sort of processing it in my head because, like you rightly pointed out, being a parent and doing this for one child or, 2, 3 children at home is very different from doing it in a classroom where all children, and there's a mix of talent spotting, right? I mean, we as parents find it difficult to spot that talent and hone that talent in, 1 or 2 children. And imagine a teacher having the responsibility to do that for a whole class of many children, along with the pressure of finishing the curriculum on time. But here are a few takeaways that I'd like to reiterate because I think those can be extremely useful. And like you said, if the teachers can be liberated from just that essential skills only, right? If there's space and time that can be created to also look at non-essential skills. And where the groups can be created, certain smaller cohorts can be created where children can come together and practice some of these non-essential skills. That's a great way that the teacher can facilitate this. In terms of how school leaders can, help with this is by, creating the space again for doing a lot of these activities in the younger years, and because once the curriculum hits for competitive exams and 9th and 10th grade, then the pressure or the rigor on academics is high, and unfortunately the space for all of this experimentation does become less. So if a little bit of that adjustment can happen at a very conscious level, that could again provide some time and space for children to hone some of their additional talents. Additionally, the one point that you brought, and I think that's something that's very essential, is how can more stakeholders be involved in doing this, right? So it's not just the parent, it's not just the teachers, not just the school leaders, but also if the children are presenting it back to the parents are also understanding how the school is allowing children to participate in some of these things. So I think it is something that the parents and the schools have to do hand in hand. Only then it is going to make sense for a child to have that holistic environment and be able to develop or hone a certain skill. So thank you so much, Bharat, for all of those insights.
Mansi,
Yeah.
if I may just add a couple of thoughts here. Right, I think we all know that from a teacher's point of view, it's quite a packed schedule, right? And so like bringing in all of these will require a lot more pre-thought and planning, which can kind of make it a little bit easier on the teacher in terms of executing inside a classroom. And so from a school leader or a school principal's point of view, giving that guidance, giving that free way to the teacher to kind of, be able to incorporate these. And also from a teacher's point of view, to be able to help children express it in whatever form they are very comfortable with, right? Like not everything needs to be written and submitted. Can a student create a video of how a concept works, or how they want to explain a concept working? And because technology is becoming so ubiquitous in everything that we do, right, getting these children to familiarize themselves with digital tools is a way to also build certain kind of digital literacy in students. So I think both as people who are in schools teaching children, as organizations like ourselves who are working in the space of education, I think for us, I think the key challenge will be to think of how we can stretch our boundaries of imagination to accept different forms of input responses from students that can be considered as well, instead of the standard multiple choice or a written response that we normally take up.
I think, yeah, I think you've brought in a very, very important point, because, I think we're all again talking about the whole interdisciplinary part, where we don't need to compartmentalize learning in subjects and in the current modes that we are familiar with. So thank you so much for bringing that point forth, Aarthi. Now, Ashwini, I'll move to you. As we are discussing all of this, I think another key word that we hear again and again from multiple stakeholders in the space of education is computational thinking, because computational thinking seems to be the foundation for any technology related education. But Ashwini, could you break this down for us? Can you tell us what really does computational thinking mean, and what are some of those practical ways to integrate then computational thinking into daily classroom activities? So please break this down for us, because I have so many definitions of computational thinking. I would really like to understand, what does it mean for you as an educator? How does EI, sort of approach this? And then what can we do to do this, to bring this into our classrooms?
Yeah, so it's a sudden buzzword that we're hearing everywhere. But the funny thing is, it's actually not that recent at all. It's at least, let's say 50 years old. The idea itself is pretty old, and the word itself was used for the first time by this lady called Jeanette Wing, Professor Wing. She's a computer science professor at Columbia University, and around 2006, she published a paper where she spoke about this. And she also said this is as fundamental a skill as reading and writing, like reading, writing, and numeracy, that is. So literacy, numeracy, and digital skills are like, they should form the fundamental education, the basis for young kids. So the idea behind this is there are different ways of problem solving itself. So CT, computational thinking, or CT as we call it for short. So there are different ways of solving problems that different cohorts of people use. For example, engineers and designers use something called design thinking. Mathematicians use something called mathematical thinking. And given the increasingly digital world, computer scientists and programmers use an approach of problem solving called computational thinking. Now, is it only for those who are coders? Well, certainly not. It's, like I said, a problem solving technique. So an archaeologist can use it, a doctor can use it, a musician can use it, right? It's basically problem solving and critical thinking in a way that is best suited to the digital world. So it basically has 4 components. So the pillars of computational thinking, now this is a little bit of jargon, but I won't dwell too much on it. So there's decomposition, that is taking a larger problem and breaking it down. Many times, if you go back to certain decisions in life yourself, things seem too complex or overwhelming simply because we treat what is actually a set of small problems as a larger problem. And even in my professional journey, I can tell you, the mentors that I've had, the leaders I've worked with, it's not people who necessarily knew much more than me, information, like we had access to the same information, because who doesn't have, you can just go, okay, Google and ask for anything, right? So it's not really about access to information, but about how they approach problems themselves. They were very good at breaking a large-ish problem into smaller pieces. They'll ask the right questions, so that each question I'm able to answer a lot more easily. And now those individual pieces seem a lot more solvable. So that is decomposing a larger problem. Then there are other skills like pattern recognition, being able to recognize patterns in numbers, in shapes, in colors, in language, in a lot of abstract elements. So pattern recognition is another very important skill that computer programmers use to be able to take a problem that they've already solved and see whether the same solution kind of applies to something else. And do they have like a general solution of sorts that applies to multiple different problems?
Okay.
Then there is algorithmic thinking, very, very crucial and fundamental to what coding is about. So are you able to look at a sequence of steps that you need to follow to solve this problem? So the idea behind this is, if you're able to generate the sequence of steps, then either you can get another human, or in today's time, a computer to simply follow those steps and do it for you, which is the basic idea behind automating tasks, which is what we're doing a lot these days, right? We figured out, okay, a lot of problems have this algorithmic solution. So if you just follow those, you'll be able to solve it.
Right.
And then finally, you have something called abstraction, which says, for example, you have a whole amount of huge data set in front of you, say, and then you're trying to answer a certain question. So which of these crazy number of data points, and we do this a lot at EI, right? We collect a lot of data about how students are performing on the asset paper, and then what are the scores across different grades, across different questions, across different topics or domains of questions, across different schools and across different regions in the country. So if I want to answer one specific question, then I'll have to ignore everything else. I'll have to know how to filter out everything, all other data, so I can answer this specific question. So that is another important skill. So all of these skills together come together to make a person a computational thinker. Because just teaching somebody how to code, say, specifically in case of computer science, is not enough. If that were the case, every person who's learned some programming language should become a computational thinker. No, it doesn't work that way. Or should become a good programmer also. The
Right.
idea is the element of CT allows them to not just learn how to code, but how good programmers think.
Right.
That's where the entire difference is.
Correct.
Now, as to how do you integrate something like this with your regular classes, where there's actually not too complicated. I know the first question for teachers would be, oh, again, I have to add something extra, and I already have so much to cover in my curriculum. So
Right.
it's not about doing a whole lot of extra stuff. It's just about doing your existing things a little differently, because physics is physics, math is math, chemistry is chemistry. But how you teach it is going to make all the difference. So I'll just give an example. One thing you could do, no matter whether you're a science or a humanities class or any others, whether it's English, maths, or social studies, what you could do is allow the child to be able to see the steps in their decision making. Even while teaching something, it'll be a good idea to sort of give either a visual or an algorithmic format of teaching a new rule. Say, for example, you're trying to teach new grammatical rules.
Right.
Why not put it into a flow chart and say, okay, where do I use an apostrophe? If
Yeah.
the first question is, are you trying to make something that is singular, plural, like cake, cakes, cookies? Is that what you're trying to do? Then don't use it here. Okay, then if you're trying to make something plural, don't use an apostrophe. On the other side is the word it, it. Now here, if you're trying to make something possessive, where do you use an apostrophe? You say, okay, Mansi's, or this phones, this mugs. So
Right.
when you're trying to make something possessive, you use an apostrophe. But with it, which is an exception, you'd say, oh, with it, if you use an apostrophe, it becomes it is. So give them those rules in front of them to be able to visualize that there is an algorithm that is followed. I would say the same for example, using ed to convert a present tense word into a past tense word.
Right.
Similarly, divisibility rules in math, classifying a quadrilateral as, say, rhombus or a rectangle or parallelogram. There's a very neat way of doing this thing. Okay, two edges are parallel, this is a trapezium. Or four edges, two sets of edges are parallel to each other, it is a parallelogram. So two sets of edges are parallel and 90 degree, or this is a rectangle. So let them be able to see this. It can also be used to assess whether the child has understood the rule. Imagine you've taught them something. You get them to put it in a flowchart so they have understood their own thought process. So this is also a concept of meta learning, where they're able to see how they are learning something, and then you can actually gain insights from it, point out where they probably learned it incorrectly. A lot of misconceptions come up.
Right.
Another thing you could do in science is in math as well, maybe delay revealing the equations or the theorem to a point where there is some curiosity around it. Instead, if you could guide students through the historical or the logical processes that led to those discoveries, there must have been something that current theory or that current explanation did not fit, which is why there was a need for a better one. Equations, the way we teach them, we just like give it to them and say, okay, you plug this into the question and then you'll have your answer. That's exactly what you need to replicate in your exam, and you'll get these 5 out of 5 marks.
Right.
Yes, they'll get those 5 out of 5 marks, but the concept is lost on them. And that also in real life, your questions won't be so beautifully laid out with exactly all the right information in the question. Doesn't work that way. Right? So have them, encourage them to develop their own understanding, and why was there a need for better example, a better equation, or better theories, and then how it sort of developed over time. And that is done that very much uses critical thinking.
Right. So sorry, Ashwini, I'm just going to cut you here for a second, because I know we're coming almost to the end of this panel discussion. And here's where I want to encourage all of our audience members to actually post your questions, right? I mean, you ask us the right questions, you'll get better information. Like we said, asking the right questions is very important. So here's your chance to ask our panelists some good questions, great questions, because we really want you to, go back with information that can help you. If you ask your questions in the Q&A box, in the Q&A section, we will ask our panelists. You can actually direct them to a certain panelist, or if it's an open question, anybody from the panel can answer that question. Ashwini, back to you. Please complete your answer, and then we can move to the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's just a whole lot of stuff that we sort of already know, but we're just putting it together so that it stays in our mind when we want to actually action these. Another thing that we could very easily do is have student-led clubs. A lot of this doesn't even need the teacher to always be present and be driving all this. Because a lot of times when you allow them to, say, form a brain teaser club, puzzle club, a code breakers club, where they're using different coding and encoding techniques like the Enigma machine. There's so many different kinds of coding techniques out there. And some of them are very ancient. It's not even in the digital age. So breaking codes is not even recent. Or a programming club. So this peer-led approach, you'll be surprised how much of innovation it fosters, how collaborative it can get, how it fosters leadership, where certain kids will automatically assume a sort of leadership role and start driving these activities. And that can happen even at the school level. And it enhances problem-solving skills in a very, very collaborative way. All the teacher will need to do is, of course, have some guardrails, making sure that they oversee that none of this is bordering on something harmful or misleading, any no bullying, etc. That's all you really need to take care of.
Thank you. And I think, a lot of the points that you made earlier took me back to my own experience of, having studied architecture, but then not really having practiced architecture. But I think every time I reflect back on that, that 5 years of rigorous architectural training and how it is actually helping me even today, I think the biggest takeaway from there has been drawing, like being able to draw out my problems, because that's what architecture did. Everything was boxed, everything was drawn. So whether it was problem solving, whether it was, just big sheets of paper, sit down, start making boxes, start connecting dots, so you just start seeing the problem in a very, very different manner when you lay it out in an infographic. So, I may not be designing buildings anymore with my, knowledge of architecture, but what it is really helping me do now is to literally translate all of my problems, whether they're business problems, everyday life problems, into an infographic of sorts, and therefore really following that algorithmic approach to come, or just to see the problem as it is, and therefore arrive at solutions. So I think that's an extremely important skill, really, boxes your problems, brings it down, simplifies it. So I definitely am a believer in this approach to actually even solve very large scale problems. So thank you for sharing all of those useful tips. I'm going to actually move on to the questions now. Here's a great question from Sheetal, who wants to know that, any pedagogical shift is also very difficult for parents, because we've learned a certain way. We think we've all turned out all right. So what was wrong with how we were learning? So that pedagogical shift is very very difficult for parents. So how does one convince parents? How do school leaders and educators actually help the parents in understanding any new pedagogical processes, and therefore adopt them easily? Open to any of you, anybody, maybe you can, Aarthi, would you like to take that?
Sure, sure. I can add some points to this. I think it's a great question, right? Some of us are even doing a dual role. We are educators, we are also parents ourselves. So sometimes when we wear the hat of a parent, we are questioning why is the school not doing what I used to do when I was a student, right? So I think from a school's point of view, from a teacher and from the principal's point of view, management point of view, I think one great way is to create awareness. I think a lot of it is our conditioning that this works, anything else doesn't work, right? What we don't know might not possibly work because there's no proof in our visible area, right? So I think one is to create awareness on how these techniques, or what is the thought process behind wanting to implement these techniques in our schooling, teaching, learning system. The second thing is to understand where parents are coming from. Sometimes parents are possibly coming from the fear of missing out. I am, like paying a lot. I am putting in a lot of my effort to help my child succeed, right? I don't want to miss out on anything. And there is a huge sense of, even amongst parents, peer pressure, right? My neighbor's child is doing this. My child is not yet doing this. Yeah, so I think that plays on all our minds, and it's important to for educators to know that this is possibly something that's playing on parents' mind, and how could they possibly address this? Of course, awareness, to a lot of show and tell, right? Like get our children to share what they're doing in front of the parents, like Bharat had said earlier, right? Like when they see their children are doing some of these things and are able to articulate, or are able to show their skill, how their skill is getting developed, I think it brings a whole lot of sense of happiness and also acceptance among parents. So that's another thing. So celebrate, showcase, create awareness. These are some ways in which we can slowly start educating the parent community. And I think from a system as a whole also, even from a board exam point of view, things are slowly beginning to change, right? Like what the board exam asks for is starting to change. And I think slowly all of those changes put together, we will definitely see a more willingness and acceptance from the parent community.
Right. Thank you, Aarthi, for that answer. And I have a lot of questions actually coming in now. Ashwini, there is a question for you actually from Noor Jahan. Amrita's question is also similar. So I'm just going to ask you that question. Is that, there are some children who are, not interested in a lot of the activities, and they just do not engage in a classroom. So what are some of those interesting activities that can be done without pen and paper, especially for, say, CT and mathematics, that can also engage children who, sort of pen paper writing intimidates them in some ways? So what can we do with those children?
Yeah, so a whole lot of my previous work has been in activities that is not pen and paper led. In fact, when we say activities, my brain automatically thinks something that you're doing with your hands, something that has an output, something that's tangible. It took me a while even to convince myself that writing code was activity, but then it's a good idea to club that with it. So there could be two reasons for why the child is not interested, right? It could either be that they are not convinced that this is important, or it could just be even not being very confident about being able to do it. So how a little empathy there would help, and also try and do those kind of activities we spoke about, right? Those science activities or math activities. I think somebody had asked about what activities can we do that's off pen and paper. My answer would also be off device in class. It doesn't have to depend on you going to a computer lab every time. So imagine you trying to teach them something other than decimal numbers, something that computers use, like a base 2 system, zeros and ones. So you could actually just have slips of paper with 0 on one side and 1 on the other, and then try and have them convert a decimal number into something like this just by flipping those cards. And here, again, when we say activity, don't hog the activity yourself. I know we are also super excited to get our hands dirty on it, but let the kids do it. Maybe demonstrate it once and then have them come either one by one or in groups and do this. And we've noticed that a whole lot of hyper kids in class behave themselves beautifully the moment they get to take the limelight, because there simply isn't enough for them to do in a pen and paper format. When that's all they're doing throughout the class, and then they have a lot more energy than the average kid, then this is a good way to at least channel that energy. And then also maybe come and have them talk about what did they learn from it, etc. So that at least sells the idea of, oh, this is not something silly, or, like, I'm convinced that this is important, it's interesting, and I'm engaged in it, and I'm also feeling valued while doing this. So that's a good idea. That's a good way to handle those kids without having to be nasty in class.
Thank you, Ashwini, for that. And I know we're at the end of time, but one last question for you, and if you can wrap that up maybe in 30 seconds, is in terms of teamwork and collaboration, right? I think as school leaders, they will face this challenge of aligning everybody on any new initiatives or any sort of new pedagogical approach. So in your opinion, in your experience, what have some of those strategies worked for enhancing teamwork and collaboration for such activities?
Question itself was focused on children, but I would in fact slightly take on a different tangent, saying how can schools enable teachers to collaborate more with each other? So if you have science teachers in different sections of a class, how can we enable these teachers to collaborate with each other, to learn from each other's experiences, to provide that much better experience to the classes as a whole? And the more we encourage these collaborations across the teachers, I think we will find those avenues to do it among students as well. Doing group activities, etc., is the first simple step. But can we also provide the space for students to actually push us in terms of what would they like to learn next? Rather than it being a top-down kind of a thing, can we make it a more peer-driven kind of an approach where students tell us that this is how they are seeing this topic as relevant to them, and therefore they would like to pursue something. So if we are able to break that barrier in terms of students will do what they are told to, but rather they can actually ask for and explore more in terms of what interests them, I think those are all the avenues that we should try and explore.
Okay, thank you so much. And I know we still have a lot of more questions from Geeta and Soumya and Nidhi, but we'll have to wrap up. We are actually 2 minutes over time. So thank you so much, Aarthi, Varath, Ashwini, for sharing such beautiful insights and actually giving us very strong takeaways to start practicing at home, start applying in classrooms. And for everybody whose questions are not answered, or if you have more questions even after the session, we are going to be sharing a feedback form. So please, number one, share your feedback with us, and also, your questions. We'll try our best to reach out to the panelists and get you answers to your questions. Thank you so much, everyone, again, for making time on a Saturday evening. Have a great weekend, and we shall end the webinar now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.